Welcome to Unlearning with Laura, the podcast where you get to rewire your mind, reclaim your power, and break generational cycles. I'm Laura Stiles, clinical hypnotherapist and mindset coach, and founder of The Mindful Generation, the place where parents come to transform their lives and live with more purpose and freedom. Let's dive in. Dévashi Shakti was a major influence in opening the entire feminine embodiment niche for women with her creation of Tigress Yoga in 2005. She's worked with both men and women in her 28 years as an intimacy confidante and is a specialist teacher for women learning about deep feminine somatic. Recently, she started the Beyond Patriarchal S project, which is a space for both women and men to explore deeper nuances of intimacy together. This is going to be a deeply transformative and thought-provoking episode. Please like, share, follow and subscribe. Here we go. Okay, today I have with me the wonderful Dévashi Shakti, all the way from Bali, and Dévashi is incredible. I found her on Instagram. I love the sound of what she's doing. And I sent her a DM asking if she would like to come on the podcast, and I'm so blessed that she's decided to come on because we're going to have an incredible conversation today. Welcome, Dévashi.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
You're so welcome. I think this is going to be a really, really insightful and fascinating conversation for all the listeners. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and the journey that you're on with your work.
Yeah, I can start with saying I feel blessed that for basically all of my life, I've been able to sustain myself doing what I feel called from within to be sharing with the world. And yeah, it turns out that it's quite powerful and effective. And I've been able to support, I don't even know how many thousands of women at this point, to transform themselves to also live more from their inner experience and let go of a lot of the conditioning and the social programming, especially around women and the feminine, that we tend to take on. And so that they are also free to be and to bring what they're really here for. And there's a million other things I could say, but that's maybe enough for right now.
Yeah, that's a really great way to summarize it. And I was quite worried for you then because I was like, how is she going to put all of her over 20 years of amazing work into one tiny little answer? So yeah, I was impressed by that answer. But yeah, and also I'm already feeling almost hypnotized by the way you speak. So I can almost kind of imagine you in your sessions and doing the work you do, and I can kind of get a really good kind of vibe as to the way that you work, because you seem like you're very intuitive, and I can feel already that you're embodying exactly what you're teaching, and that just comes across even on the screen. So, and I want to ask you about why teaching the embodiment of feminine wisdom is so important to you.
Well, firstly, it was just so important to me in my own experience as a female. And I started working with healing, massage, different forms of massage and energy healing from a really young age, from when I was 17. And I had a kundalini experience in my first Sacred Mother Sweat Lodge ceremony, which was totally unplanned, not what the ceremony was about, and yet it happened anyway. And it was after that pivotal experience that everything became about spiritual sexuality very specifically. And even more specifically, the female experience of that. It was like more of my soul presence really descended into my body and into my life, even more than it was, I guess. And so I believe that what we get to experience as women in this healing and restoration process that we go through on that embodied level is bringing frequency into our relationships and into the world that has been so dormant and oppressed and missing, and it's the very substance that heals and that connects and restores humanity, which sounds very idealistic, but I kind of am.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I feel like, first of all, I'm going to just rewind a little bit, because you mentioned like about how you felt from a young age almost like you had this sense of purpose. And I've started feeling a little bit like that with the work I'm doing. And I feel almost like stripping back all this kind of patriarchal conditioning in whichever way we do it, whether it's, I don't know, whether we're magnetized by work with, for me, it's working with parents, and for someone else, it might be working, with men, or specifically, whatever you do, it doesn't matter kind of how you do it. But I think that collectively, there's a lot of people at the moment, at this point in evolution, who are a really important part of that. And I don't know about you, but I feel like we're on this kind of cusp of, like you said, like it's an idealistic way of looking, but I've got a lot of hope. I feel like we're going to have to start seeing this shift, because at the moment the world feels heavy and things feel really crap. And I think with the work that people like us are doing, we've got to just like lift everyone out of this. And so, yeah, educating, sharing, healing, all of those kind of ways that we're supporting others in the world. And even if it's just sharing with knowledge and education, I think that hopefully there's going to be a brighter future. And that does involve not just trying to take men out of the picture, or ensure that men are not trying to flip it so that they're the oppressed people. It's not about that, is it? So let's
No.
maybe dive into the actual word because what bugs me is, you use the word patriarchy on social media, and sometimes you don't get any reach, or like it's sort of shadow banned or whatever, because clearly they're worried. There's like a Meta or whoever like are worried, like, oh, what's going on, and those words are like almost not allowed to be used. But it's not about them or us, it's about just having that equality and working together and having balance, isn't it, between the feminine and the masculine.
I truly see that clearly naming patriarchy and the effects that it has on everyone is nothing to do with being anti-man, because men are suffering in a different way under patriarchy too.
Yeah.
And the men who are more evolved, are more expanded in their self-awareness, know this really clearly. And so there are men that do not take any offense to the use of these terms. And like I've said on my podcast, to name it is quite simply to identify a recurring pattern happening in the world. It's just pattern recognition in a way. It's not a personal attack. It's naming a collective issue that both men and women uphold, actually, in different ways. And so we all have our process of deconstructing, from it, unraveling personally from it, and becoming the version of ourselves who's living beyond it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a good way to put it, like talking about the fact that there are so many men out there who, and you probably have worked with some of them, who know that this benefits everyone. And yeah, like for me, for example, my husband is a feminist, and he can see the benefits of us stripping back that conditioning and programming, and especially when it comes to sex. So let's talk about the work that you're doing specifically at the moment. You've been doing some research, and you're still in sort of the research phase, I'm guessing, because you're writing a book, and the book is called Stop Having Patriarchal S. And you've got an amazing account on Instagram called Beyond Patriarchal S. But what's amazing is you've also set up the podcast that supports that, and where you're having some really great conversations. Let's talk a little bit more about that. And can you just define patriarchal S for everyone, please?
Yeah. Well, firstly, the research has been happening for decades, really, through all the work that I've been doing. But there is a survey that you're referring to, which is going to collect and is collecting experiences in everyone's, in their own words, in their own terminology. And I really wanted to include those real voices in the book that will come eventually, because originally it was the first step, and now it's turning out to be the last step. So I'll get there eventually.
I can imagine it's a huge thing to put together and to do. Yeah.
So to define patriarchal sex, look, I haven't attempted to perfect some totally concise, thorough way of saying it. I think at this point it feels better to let it come out a little differently each time. But to try and say it succinctly, it's a very male-centric orientation in physical sexual intimacy that is so normalized, so assumed, so expected that it can't even be seen for what it is. People literally assume that's what sex is. That's just how it is. Why would you question it?
Yeah.
Because we are living under, I'm going to call it the spell of patriarchy in the culture, in the society. It's very hard to see it. And it's hard for people to comprehend that to see it is different to looking for someone to blame. And so the terminology itself creates all these filters and challenges for people to wrap their mind around what this is, or just immediately discard it and judge it and fear it or project onto it or whatever else that they do. But the opportunity to investigate it and look into it is something that can completely change your life. Quality of life, quality of sex, actual intimacy can happen when looking into, well, what's in place to stop it happening. And that would be the invisible paradigm of patriarchy and how that plays out in intimate relating between men and women, especially.
Yes, absolutely. And porn has a massive part to play in that as well, doesn't it?
It does.
Magazine, like back in my day, in the 90s when my brothers were young, it was all about porn magazines. These days, there is just such an unbelievable amount that people can access at the tip of their fingers. And yeah, I would imagine that has such a huge part to play in, the programming, that subconscious programming for both men and women.
Yeah, it's like the more desensitized people have become, which is a real thing, the more dehumanizing the pornography becomes. And I'm aware that there are really quite amazing researchers, sociologists that totally focus on this. And so I haven't even seen all of that information, to be honest. This is just my own experience that I'm speaking from. And it's incredibly damaging in a lot of different ways. And I'm particularly concerned about the kids and the young people and the exposure of the level of depravity that is being normalized now as porn because it's violence against women. I'm not talking about full-on hitting. I just mean the absence of care, as well as the spitting and the choking and all of that, coming on her face. Like, these are the standard visuals that boys are expecting to experience as sex. People are perceiving it as actual sex education. So it's incredibly misinforming. And the research is here to show that some boys in school are assuming that it's their role to rape. These are not theories. These are things that are actually occurring in school.
Just so depressing hearing that. Obviously, excuse me. Yeah, as a parent of boys, and my boys are quite young, so these conversations haven't started yet, but I will absolutely be having very important conversations with them when the time is right about how you treat women and what sex should be, and also ensuring that this is going to, even just talking about this one little bit of the conversation, I feel like we'd need a whole hour for this, but just things like, pleasuring yourself as a male and not feeling ashamed to be able to do that, because I've sorry, I'm going to go off on a little I do this, I go off on tangents, but I had a conversation with my dad a couple of years ago, and he said, when I was young, my dad's very open, by the way, he talks about all sorts of things, and he's like, I was playing with myself in my bedroom. I was probably about 7, and my mum came in, and the words that came out were just, she wasn't even a proper Christian. Like, they didn't go to church or anything, but she was like, God would be disgraced by this. Don't you dare ever do that again. And, really just hammering it in, like, this is disgusting. Don't ever do that. And then she said, I'm going to get your father up here. And then he gave him, a load of, like, punished him for it, essentially. And he was really, like, when he was sharing this with me and my husband, we were just like, oh God, that must have been awful. And he said, I felt so much shame, like so much shame for a lifetime over that. And it made me think, oh gosh, we need to make sure, like, raising our boys, that they don't feel, because I think that a lot of men struggle with shame. And as I said, that's a whole nother topic, but like, yeah, knowing what to do. And then porn plays such a big part. And like you mentioned, like that kind of the violent stuff, and thinking that it's normal to, strangle whilst having sex, that kind of stuff is just dangerous. And I really feel like it's a big duty of ours as parents, for all the listeners, to have those conversations with our children when the time is right, as to like what sex can be, and also that intimacy doesn't have to be rushed. The goal isn't to just pump and dump, as Susan Bratton would say it, because I heard her on your podcast, and just like rush it all, and for the man to be pleasured, and for the woman to just be kind of forgotten. It can be really lovely when it's like slow, intimate, connected, attuned, and it doesn't feel quite so lonely at the end of it.
Well, that's not meant to be the case.
Exactly. So yeah, sorry. Go on.
Your dad sounds like an incredible man. He was so open and willing to share what people often internalize for the rest of their life as shame.
Yeah, the great thing about my dad is he has shared a lot about his relationship with his mother. And I have learned so much about generational trauma, and I've learned so much about him. And, I used to kind of wonder why he is how he is, but actually, anger, it's sort of grief, anger, lots of things that happened within his life. What I'm so grateful for is that he is an open book and shares things, and that's allowed me to learn so much, and then to be able to view things with compassion when it comes to family members, but also clients as well. And so, yeah, it's hard. I think it's hard for women who feel like patriarchal sex is the only way, if they are starting to get conscious to it. And it's hard for men to perhaps reprogram themselves in the way that they have intimacy with their partners.
Well, there is really not much chance in a lot of cases of intimacy with their partners unless they are becoming intimate with themselves. Most conscious intimacy tantric teachers will say that that is the very first step, for sure.
Yes, loving yourself first. Learning to love yourself, working on, self-worth, self-love is definitely a good first step. And I guess before that, then you have to kind of start with awareness. And I'm hoping that if anyone can take anything away from this conversation, it's just maybe perhaps having awareness of what perhaps could be improved and changed. On that note, I'd love to just dive into, the parents that may be listening to this, especially, I know it's mostly mums that listen, but if they are in a phase of their life where they've had children, they've lost their libido or not felt very connected to their partner because of those early years of parenthood and the stress of it all, and they may be feeling resentment towards partners because they're doing so much and the mental load is stressful. What kind of, I guess I'll put you on the spot here, which might be quite annoying, but what kind of advice or tips could you give to those kinds of women who maybe wanting to kind of get that spark back, but in a really healthy, conscious way?
So, firstly, I'm not a parent. However, I have worked with a lot of parents.
Yeah.
And what I have seen from the people that I've worked with is that a woman is typically likely to be accommodating and enabling of patriarchal sex prior to kids, because it just hasn't been questioned. However, after pregnancy and birth, which is a very powerful initiation process for a woman and a woman's body, she can no longer tolerate what she was tolerating before. She no longer has the capacity to, for a start, and doesn't want to a lot of the time.
Totally. That's definitely from my experience. I can agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is where conscious intimacy, tantric sexuality becomes not a luxury, actually. It becomes, well, this is just how it could be instead of patriarchal sex. And so I really encourage a lot of self-honesty if anyone resonates with the things that I've named. Because like I said, this is not about blaming the men and what they're doing and how they're programmed, because we've also been programmed as women to allow it.
Yes.
And you mentioned people pleasing earlier when we were talking. And so that's a really big part in this of how women hold patriarchy in place.
Definitely.
And right. So with a lot of self-awareness and self-kindness, we've got to be willing to look at how are we contributing to our own suffering? How can we withdraw from that? And what are we connecting to instead? So that you can trust yourself, know your body, and be able to share yourself and share your body in a way that feels connected to you and invites your partner into a different version of intimacy than what you have known before. And so with both individuals, it takes quite a bit of self-exploration, but also just with the closeness and the vulnerability and the trust and safety in the connection, so much can naturally unfold with that. So a combination of the self-honesty, honesty with each other, and I personally don't understand how any couple can maintain a conscious relationship without having a safe, sacred, meta-level space where they meet and can share properly, authentically with each other, so that you're not just like throwing things at each other while you're busy doing something else. And there's respect of each other's process, and you can bring it to sacred space and be able to properly express, properly be heard, and mutually of each other. There's so many things to implement.
Yeah, no, I love that. Just what you've explained there is a really great place to start. And I think a big one for us, it's easier to just talk about our experience because we've been on a bit of a journey, me and my husband, in the last couple of years with this. But I will say that you mentioned there about like trust and openness and like being able to communicate what you really want. And what I struggled with about a year ago, maybe longer, was I was like, I don't actually know what I want. I don't know what I enjoy. I feel like I've sort of been numb for so long because I've been in mother mode for so long. And my boobs were used for feeding my children, and I still view them almost like that feeding vessel. And I almost like didn't want them to be touched. And I was like, I'm still like a mum. And then suddenly, as we started speaking and we did sensate focus stuff. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure you're aware of. Yeah, we did like these kind of exercises, and we started talking, and it was very, very awkward in the beginning because I was like, I don't know, and this feels too hard. And honestly, the cringing. I'm sure you might have noticed this with clients that you've worked with, but I was just like so closed and almost wanted to, like my throat chakra was just like really, I could feel it everywhere, but I was like, this is too hard. I don't think we're going to get through this and get out the other side. But the more that I tried to think about what I really wanted and open up, and the more actual, like really difficult conversations we had, suddenly, a few months in, the easier it started getting. And then I was like, okay, we're having conversations now, and I don't feel like I'm being judged. And I wasn't being judged before. I just perceived it as judgment from him because it felt so new having these conversations. But my husband has been amazing because he's been reading like these fantastic books, and he's been learning all about the female body, and was like, I just cannot believe I didn't know this stuff. And I cannot believe that I've been in relationships my whole adult life doing things probably completely wrong and not like figuring out how a woman's body actually works, and that our clitoris isn't this tiny little thing, it's actually quite big underneath and things like that. Oh, it's amazing that you're learning this, and I didn't know that either. And we had such great conversations, and from there we've been on such an interesting journey that we're still on. But yeah, just so many things you said there that I could dive into, and I should book in a session with you actually, because it would probably be really beneficial. But yeah, so much that comes down to communication, trust, and compassion for each other as well.
Yeah, and as cringy or awkward as it can be, I mean, that's part of the beauty of intimacy as well, when you feel just really, self-conscious or awkward or vulnerable. Like it's part of what opens up the flow of energy between your body and their body, because you're not over internalizing too much, which shuts down and contracts everything. So I'm happy for you that you have a partner who's exploring with you and he's interested and willing to look into these things. It's really important. And often the women that I'm working with don't have that, actually.
That might be really hard.
Yeah, but there's still so much that can happen, because it's much harder the other way around, when the man wants to explore and the woman doesn't. I've worked with that a lot in the past when most of my clients were men, but now it's very often the case that the woman really wants to open up to a very expansive experience, and she's dealing with someone that is consciously not even interested in that, and yet they have their love and their world and their family and their connection. There's always a way, because the woman's body is so powerful. So as long as you have that desire in yourself, you don't even have to know exactly what you do want. When you were saying, but I don't know how to say what I want, it's not even the first step, actually. It's more how you're really feeling in the experience that's actually already going on. And showing that you're curious to know, how is this really for you? So there's real sharing coming back and forth. So it's not like there's this big question, you have to know what you want, you have to know how to say it. That's kind of many questions on to answer, really.
No, you're right, actually. I think that's been more of a recent question. And prior to that, there was a lot of like, I've got to learn to get out of my head and get into my body. And that was where I was really struggling, because I'd been in my head for so long. I was juggling so much. I'd been burnt out, and any sexual experience we had, I was like thinking about, what have I got to do in the morning? My head was just not in the moment. And that ended up being sort of like a pattern, because that was what happened the previous time. And so getting out of that pattern and that loop, it was super helpful. You're totally right. Like sometimes feeling into your body, kind of going with what your body wants, and just feeling. People don't feel enough, especially as busy mums. Like we've lost that. And it'd be great to get women to just learn to feel again.
Sure. And in their own self, especially, because if what we're talking about in sex is patriarchal sex, the reason they're not feeling or they're not available is because they don't fucking want it like that. That's not the type of sex they actually want to be having.
Yeah. Yes.
Why would you want to open up fully to feel that? Of course, so there's all these unconscious avoidance strategies that are set up around avoiding being present to the experience, because it's not what you want. But it can be so hard to admit that to yourself, and to risk, whatever is there that feels like a risk in opening that up and sharing it.
Yes.
The way that this is happening, I don't feel connected. I'm not feeling in my body anything that's for me that I'm receiving in this. It feels like I'm just a receptacle, a vessel for you to have your experience. And then I feel resentful because I'm doing so much, I'm holding so much, and I know that I love you, but I'm not feeling loved in this experience of our bodies. And I'm not okay with this anymore. Like, that level of honesty is so hard to access for women.
Totally. And just to have the courage to be able to say that, and for it to go down well, like, if a partner is emotionally mature enough to receive that with no judgment, and just be like, okay, how can we change this? Like, that must just be such an empowering and liberating thing for both of them. And to then go on the journey to fix things. Yeah.
And how I said it then may not be the very first step. It might be something lighter, like, oh, there's this podcast, and, maybe we should listen to an episode together, or, would you be willing to take this survey with me, like, you're doing with your partner with the patriarchal sex survey, like, just opening a conversation, checking their level of interest. And, it doesn't have to be like boom, direct immediately.
Yeah.
It can be, a book, or, exploration together.
Definitely, yeah. And like you made a really good point about the podcast, because that was the other thing we did. We listened to so many podcasts. I mentioned before Susan Bratton, who was, huge on the Diary of a CEO, and you've had her on your podcast. Anyone listening, please go and listen to that episode, because Susan is just so like magnetic and fun and full of energy. But she's got so many like awesome, helpful things to say. She gives a lot of value, doesn't she, with everyone she speaks to. You also had a guest called Kate White on, who talks about like the early imprint, the way that we enter the world, and the like trauma from those very early imprint stages of our lives, and even in utero. And I found that episode so interesting. So that's another one that I'm going to recommend for people to listen to as well.
Yeah, Kate's a beautiful, beautiful soul. And that level of it is really pivotal in how patriarchy gets to be so normalized in the world. It really does start at birth and prior. So it's a pretty huge thing to deconstruct.
Yeah, listening to that really almost blew my mind. I was like, wow, this is something that really does start at conception, like from our parents. And I just found that so interesting. So, oh my God, there's so many questions I have for you, but I was going to talk a bit about like the collective consciousness and like how we can all work together in kind of fixing this problem of the way that we're governed by the patriarchy. And I guess, because I feel like if we all work together, this will change the world for the better. And I know I was talking about this earlier, but how do you feel, sort of going beyond patriarchal sex, how do you imagine that will help us in the future at an evolutionary level? Like, what can you see for the future if this was to change in a really positive way?
Oh my gosh. Everything.
Yeah.
The planet would be unrecognizable compared to how it is now. It would be that level of change. And that's why I'm focusing on this, because it's so core in what is holding the current paradigm in place.
Yeah. I can't help but think back to like the 70s, where there was this real big kind of hippie movement. And I know that I sort of think of California when that comes to my mind, but I think it was just happening in a lot of like Western countries. People were kind of getting, I don't know, like whether they were in altered states or whatever, but it felt like there was an opportunity around that time for things to start shifting. But then it almost went backwards again in the kind of like the 80s. And do you feel like we're almost falling back into that sort of state again of the 70s when things were shifting? Or how do you feel about, as we're talking about feeling, how are you feeling about like the present time that we're in and the way things are shifting?
I can hear from how you speak that you're very optimistic, like I also am.
Yeah, I am.
That this project has called me to look into things that are really disturbing, and it's such a reminder to be really realistic as well. Look, there is a collective expansion, awakening that I feel and perceive happening. And the thing is, amplification, expansion happens with both at light and dark.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful to say, if everyone were willing to do this. The reality is that everyone is not. However, the elevation is going to come regardless, and those of us that want to be facilitating that consciously, are going to be creating possibilities for it to exist more and more in so many areas, pockets of society, like all over the planet. Well, I know that your podcast platform here is a lot for parents and mothers in particular. And so I want to emphasize the role that women have in not consenting anymore to a paradigm that is so far below the standard that, say, you would want for your own daughter, and yet might be accepting as normal for yourself, right? Like, we have to step into the maturity of ourselves as women that sets up the next generations to have a higher standard normalized. And so we can only do the part that we can do, And so when you really attend to your own healing, I trust and I feel that the transpersonal purpose that we are able to bring and want to bring is revealed, So we can talk about the huge, big collective picture, but at the end of the day, we can only do what we can do, which is a lot.
Yes, yeah, that's a brilliant way to put it, because I mean, yeah, like you said, I am hugely optimistic and I do love to look at the big picture. And I have this image in my mind of like the utopia that we could live in if this all, works out well. But as parents who are listening to this, I think yeah, like you said, you start with yourself. What can you do yourself to really improve the way that you live and to give yourself autonomy, like what boundaries can you put in place? Like start small with like, okay, what am I not going to put up with anymore because I'm done with this shit? Like boundaries, getting rid of the people pleasing, like that conditioning that women are we so easily fall into from our, just the way that we are programmed as children. You can start.
Yeah, and making sure that it's the embodied example that we're willing to show, because we say is not what gets imprinted at that deeper level. It's who we are, how they sense and feel us in the inner life that we're living or not, and that's the thing that replicates through the generations. So that, commitment to self-healing, to self-restoration, and making sure that what you would want for your child is something that you're actually demonstrating. And that's, easier to say than to really live. But what else are we doing? What else are we here for, if not that?
Absolutely. And just as you were speaking then, I was thinking about, the way that I grew up was with parents who were in, I'm going to just say a loveless marriage, because I don't know how else to put it in a quick kind of like succinct way. And so like intimacy wasn't really modeled to me. And again, this is something I've had to really learn, like being intimate in front of each other in terms of just like flirting and having fun and having a cuddle and a long kiss. It doesn't have to be a snog, but just a long like peck on the lips when Adam comes in from work. Like this is something we've been working on in the last few months so that the kids can see it, because I want them to know like this is what a marriage full of love looks like. And it doesn't mean you have to get married when you're older. It doesn't mean you even have to have a partner, like, but this is how it can look if you do, have this kind of future with someone. This is how it can be, and this is a respect, and all of those things we're trying to model, because it really does come down to, like you said, the embodying and the modeling when it comes to kids, doesn't it?
Yes, it's paramount. That is how they learn. So
yeah. Yeah. No, we've had to do a lot of unlearning, because both myself and my partner were not really modelled that by our parents. So it's been really fun actually, like kind of finding ourselves with that, and kind of showing that love to each other in an open way has been like scary but really, really lovely at the same time. Yeah, there's so much I want to ask you, but I'm just aware of the time. I'm not going to keep you. I have one more question I want to ask you. I do usually ask a question at the end that's the same for most of my guests, but I'm going to ask you something a little bit different. And if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But you mentioned earlier on about your awakening experience with the kundalini when you were 17. Can I ask you a little bit about what was that? What can you just explain what happened to you, and why was it such a amazing spiritual experience?
Well, that particular one was 19. I actually had quite a few before that, but I didn't have any language because I was young. So I didn't have any language or context or anything to know that it was that until much later.
Okay.
Yeah, this is one of those things that I hesitate to talk about, to be quite honest, but I'll say it in a general way. Reason I do is because when we have pivotal inner experiences like that, I believe that the essence of it is not meant to be shared. And I actually have done publicly, and I took that video down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a long time ago, because we have to retain the power and potency of our own experiences, especially in the digital social media age. I think it's really important to know that. But the general feeling of it all, or general experience of the Kundalini experience itself, is something that is like a remembrance of your true nature, your expanded nature. can be a visceral experience in and through and beyond your body,
Mm.
and have you feel really reconnected to a higher, deeper version of yourself. And then afterwards, you realize that you don't fit anymore in your limited, conditioned human reality that you've created as your life. So it's a very reorientating experience. And in that particular one, as I've already said, it was reorientating me in a very specific way to become focused in an area that I was, being nudged to hone in on.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. And I respect that, yeah, it's hard to share. I did ask you something that was quite personal, but I'm so fascinated by, I've never tried Kundalini or Kundalini yoga, or I've read about it, and I am fascinated by it just because of the way you've described it is how other people have described it. And it just sounds like, yeah, incredible.
Yeah, and there's many levels of it as well, and there's so many more ways to describe the sensory experience of it. The very ecstatic feeling and very subtle energy, and it's a confirmation that you're not just a physical being, you're not just a physical body. So it's quite magical like that.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay, I'm going to wrap up now because I'm just aware of the time. Thank you so much, Dévashi. It's been really lovely to speak to you. Such interesting work that you do. If people want to find you on Instagram, can you just let them know your handles on there?
Yeah, so Beyond PS, Beyond Patriarchal Sex, is the one for the podcast. It's a newer one. My main Instagram is the Tigress Path, and that leads women to the experiences and the training in the deep feminine approach to embodiment psychotherapy and tantric yoga practice for the female body, female psyche.
Fabulous. And your website is thetigresspath.com. And tell everyone about your next retreat and your book as well.
Well, I can't talk too much about the book at the moment because it's not happening right now, but I'm looking forward to it. And the retreat, so there is an annual Tigress Path retreat, and it is a deeper end experience for women that are already involved in the Tigress practices. So it's already familiar in your body. You have a sense of the type of energies and the dimensional depths that we go to. And when we go in person and gather together, it's a really special experience of taking that time and space out of your world. And I'm just thinking of the mothers right now and how essential that is. And I've often found that with my retreats, there's almost always a woman there who says, this is the first time I've come away from my children in my, ever. And it's essential to have a dedicated time and space to experience yourself fully as a woman and then bring that back to your everyday life. And this particular retreat is, I call it like a monastery style atmosphere, because while the practices are very expressive, we're not dissipating our energy with lots of chit chat throughout the week. It's an invitation to really receive for your own self as fully as you can all the energies that you're generating every day in the week-long retreat, and learn what it's like to feel that version of yourself where you're actually full instead of depleted.
Okay, so is there lots of slowing down and peace and quietness? Because that is right up my street.
Yeah, yeah. And the place we're doing it, the actual retreat center, is quite secluded and dedicated to the tantric practices actually. And so everything is taken care of, everything is thought of. Bali is known as a purification portal. It's a very healing place. The nature is so healing. So the spirit of the land, there's so many factors that are just so nourishing and replenishing.
Oh, that sounds so beautiful. I'm definitely going to be looking at the one for next year just because I'm away this October, as I mentioned before. But yeah, for me personally, like I said earlier as well about being highly sensitive, I love going on I love being away from the kids, forgetting I've got children. And like you said, just like creating that space to just be me. And yeah, like everything you've described just sounds like so perfect, because I think all mothers need that in order to just find themselves again, but also go deeper and just find their true, authentic selves that is just hidden away underneath it all. So yeah, that just sounds wonderful.
And to bridge the experience back to your relationship, to your mothering, to your world is a big part of it as well. So it's very practical in that way. You get an imprint of a new way of being, and then a process of, well, how is it letting everyone experience this new version of you and allowing that expansion to remain. So I just want to mention as well how important community is for that to be the case. Otherwise, it's so easy to contract back into the same shape as before. But when there's a sense of companionship and a philosophy or an understanding that you're sharing with other women, it can make it feel more safe on that deeper instinctual level that actually, no, you can choose to live this way. And unless you give yourself that time and space really with your body, how can you possibly stop having patriarchal sex? How can you stop contributing to the things that you don't want to see happening for your children? Like, we have to learn how to receive and allow ourselves to actually be restored by what we need. And that can be confronting, but it's essential to be part of the change that you hold in your heart about how we can contribute to a different world.
Yes. And let's do that for our children. That is, yeah, it just sounds beautiful. I'm going to share all of the links to all the things we've spoken about, including your survey. Everyone who's listening, if you could just, it literally takes a couple of minutes. It would be amazing if you could complete the survey to help out with the research. And when the book does come out, I can't wait to have a look at that and order it. Very excited. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today, Dévashi. It's been fascinating. I will keep following what you're doing. I will keep listening to your podcast and sharing it with my husband, because we're both very much enjoying the fabulous guests you've got on yours. But yeah, thank you for the conversation today. It's been wonderful.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.